We love to talk of terror, but after the Munich shooting, this hypocritical catch-all term has finally caught us out. The frightful and bloody hours of Friday night and Saturday morning in Munich and Kabul, despite the 3,000 miles that separate the two cities, provided a highly instructive lesson in the semantics of horror and hypocrisy. I despair of that generic old hate word, terror. It long ago became the punctuation mark and signature tune of every facile politician, policeman, journalist and think tank crank in the world. Terror, 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 terror. Or terrorist, 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 terrorist. But from time to time, we trip up on this killer clichã copyright, just as we did at the weekend. Here's how it went. When first we heard that 3 armed men had gone on a shooting spree in Munich, the German copes and the lads and lassies of the BBC, CNN and Fox News fingered the terror lever. The Munich constabulary, we were informed, feared this was a terrorist act. The local police, the BBC told us, were engaged in an anti-terror manhunt. And we knew what that meant. The 3 men were believed to be Muslims and therefore terrorists, and thus suspected of being members of or at least inspired by ISIS. Then it turned out that the 3 men were in fact only one man, a man who was obsessed with mass killing. He was born in Germany, albeit partly Iranian in origin. And all of a sudden, in every British media and on CNN, the anti-terror manhunt became a hunt for a lone shooter. One UK newspaper used the word shooter 14 times in a few paragraphs. Somehow, shooter doesn't sound as dangerous as terrorist, though the effect of his actions was most assuredly the same. Shooter is a code word. It meant, this particular mass killer is not a Muslim. Now to Kabul, where ISIS, yes, the real horrific Sunni Muslim Isis of fearful legend, sent suicide bombers into thousands of Shia Muslims who were protesting on Saturday morning at what appears to have been a pretty routine bit of official discrimination. The Afghan government had declined to route a new power line through the minority Hazara Shia district of the country. The smaller electric cable connection had failed to satisfy the crowds and had warned the Shia men and women to cancel their protest. The crowds, many of them middle-class young men and women from the capital, ignored this ominous warning and turned up near the presidential palace to pitch tents upon which they had written in Derek justice and light and death to discrimination. But death came to them instead, in the form of 2 ISIS men, one of them apparently pushing an ice cream cart whose explosives literally blew apart 80 of the Shia Muslims and wounded at another 260. In a city in which elements of the Afghan government are sometimes called the Taliban government, and in which an Afghan version of the Sunni Muslim Islamic State is popularly supposed to reside like the bacillus within those same factions, it wasn't long before the activists who organized the demonstration began to suspect that the authorities themselves were behind the massacre. Of course, we in the West did not hear this version of events. Reports from Kabul concentrated instead on those who denied or claimed the atrocity. The horrid Islamist Taliban denied it. The horrid Islamist Isis said they did it. And thus all reports centered on the ISIS claim of responsibility. But wait. Not a single report, Not one newscast referred to the Kabul slaughter as an act of terror. The Afghan government did, but we did not. We referred to the suicide bombers and the attackers in much the same way that we referred to the shooter in Munich. Now this is very odd. How come the Muslim can be a terrorist in Europe but a mere attacker in Southwest Asia? Because in Kabul the killers were not attacking Westerners, or because they were attacking their fellow Muslims, albeit of the Shia Muslim variety? I suspect both answers are correct. I can't find no other reason for this weird semantic game. For just as the terrorist identity faded away in Munich the moment Ali Sonboly turned out to have more interest in the Norwegian mass murderer Anders Breivik than the Caliph Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi of Mosul, so the real ISIS murderers in Kabul completely avoided the stigma of being called terrorists in any shape or form. This nonsensical nomenclature is going to be further warped. Be sure of this as more and more of the European victims of the attacks in EU nations turn out to be Muslims themselves. The large number of Muslims killed by ISIS in Nice was noticed, but scarcely headlined. The 4 young Turks shot down by Ali Sonboly were subsumed into the story as an almost routine part of what is now, alas, the routine of mass killing in Europe as well as in the Middle East and Afghanistan. The identity of Muslims in Europe is therefore fudged if they are victims, but of vital political importance if they are killers. But in Kabul, where both victims and murderers were Muslim, their mutual crisis of religious identity is of no interest in the West. The bloodbath is described in anemic terms. The 2 attackers attacked and the attacked were left with 80 dead, more like a football match than a war of terror. It all comes down to the same thing in the end. If Muslims attack us, they are terrorists. If non-Muslims attack us, they are shooters. If Muslims attack other Muslims, they are attackers.